Now, Paul continues this quote unquote boasting that he started in the last chapter. And then he says this. He says, I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago. And whether I was in the body or out of the body, I don't know. Only God knows. Now, you just need to understand that he's not saying that there are three heavens or that there are levels of heaven. In their day, what they understood this third heaven is what we would call heaven. The first heaven to them would be the skies where the birds fly. The second heaven would be sort of the moon and the stars and, outer space. And then the third heaven is where God lived. It was just heaven. So don't get confused by this. Some cults teach that there are three heavens and that this is their verse for it. That's not what he means. But his whole point here is just to say, I've had experiences, and he's trying to sort of counter some of the things that the false apostles were saying. And he's trying to say, listen, I've got all these things too. He says, but in verse 7, even though I've received such wonderful revelations from God, so to keep me from being proud, I was given this thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. And so there's this famous thorn in the flesh. We don't even know what it was exactly, but what we know why it was given to him. He explains it here in the next passage. He says, 3 different times I begged the Lord, take this thing away. And each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. And so Paul then had this sort of mini revelation. And he says this, so now I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. And that's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. All the stuff that we just read in the previous chapters. And he says, for when I am weak, then I am strong. So this kind of finishes up that whole section, these last couple chapters where he's talking about the false apostles and everything that they're boasting about and they're proud about. And Paul is going on this journey and saying, okay, I'll boast for a while and show you the reasons that I can be proud in my flesh. But then he says this, but I'm not proud of my flesh. I'm not proud. Instead, I boast in my weaknesses because it's not about me and it's not about them. It's about Jesus and it's about his message and it's about his truth. And that's what he's saying in this passage. And he goes on, you can read some more of this, but he says this as he kind of shifts gears and puts on his sort of fatherly hat again. He says, for I am afraid that when I come, and he says, I'm going to come to you again, but I'm afraid that when I come, I'm not going to like what I find, and you're not going to like my response. I'm afraid that I'll find quarreling and jealousy and anger and selfishness, slander, gossip, arrogance, disorderly behavior. He says, yes, I'm afraid that when I come again, God will humble me in your presence because I'll be grieved because of many of you have not given up your old sins. You've not repented of your impurity, sexual immorality, and eagerness for lustful pleasure. I want to make sure that you understand. Paul's not saying that we're saved by doing good things. Paul's saying, he's appealing to them, like we say in Foundations Truth 1. We start by trusting Jesus. But once you've started trusting Jesus, you should move on to live to honor God in your life. And he says, I'm afraid that when I come to you, that you're just going to be living however you want. You're going to be living these selfish, self-indulgent lives. Like he talks about in Galatians chapter 5. Instead of walking by the Spirit, you're going to be living in the works of the flesh. And so he's saying, listen, I don't want that to happen when I come. And then we're going to see he's about ready to wind up here as he finishes up this letter in the next chapter. But go ahead and read chapter 12 now, and then we'll see you tomorrow for chapter 13.